I was extremely embarrassed of participating in these competitions. And
Wow.
I was extremely embarrassed that I spent hours and hours doing this. And it's hard to really explain, I think, but it's more because people tell you that this is something that you shouldn't be doing, that this is something that is lame. That's not a good word, but that's what they would say, and nerdy, and all these bad things. And so I was very proud of myself, like internally. I was like, oh, this is like, I like flew across the country twice to compete and won in the nation. I would think that I was very proud, and I was, but I never let that show. I didn't even tell my friends that I was doing this, like my friends from like school. I didn't even tell them, and because when I did bring it up, people would just laugh at it, and people would say, "You're doing Chinese history, like, why are you doing this? That's so weird." It was like that. So when I did bring it up to a few people, that was the response. So I became very ashamed of it. So I never talked about it ever throughout like high school. Only in university have I started actually being proud of it, I think, more outwardly, and realizing that this is something that I can actually talk about. I remember the first time I mentioned it, it was in a class, actually. Or the first time I talked about like this identity experience. It was actually a class for people who did not learn English as their first language, which I did not. I was in that class with mostly, it was like all immigrants. I was the only American, surprising. But I talked about it. It was the first time, and I just started crying, like in class, like right there. This was in university at UC Berkeley. So I remember a lot of people were kind of confused too, because they weren't American. They didn't really have to experience this kind of shame. And so it was just in class, just right there, like just open. But I think now at this point, it's been over a year. I started going to therapy, and I started talking about it more and learning how to process it. It's like years and years, decades of this kind of experience that I had to learn to process. So it's still like, I'm still working on it, but I'm so much better. Like I can say it now without crying. I think that's like a big improvement for me. And also generally, I've just learned to become more proud of myself. I think especially with the pride of my queer identities, I think it taught me that I can be proud of other parts too. Because just like my queerness, being Chinese is not something that I chose or can change or want to change. That's the same as how I feel about my sexuality. And so I kind of like used both of these things together in university in the past like 1 year and learned to be okay with it at first. But I think overall, the sense of shame has been with me my whole life. Like Chinese dance, like this experience that I said where I was extremely embarrassed of being in Chinese history is the same experience that I've had since I started Chinese dance. I've always, up until like high school, I was extremely embarrassed of Chinese dance. And it was also kind of external because my friends, my Chinese American friends, were embarrassed that I did Chinese dance. And also my other American friends were embarrassed to say that I did Chinese dance to other people. So I kind of learned it and I internalized it, that this is something that is embarrassing. So then when I started doing Chinese history, I was like, oh, this is just the same feeling. This is like something, it's like similar to Chinese dance. It's very cultural. So it's embarrassing. Well, it was embarrassing to me. And it was embarrassing in the community that I was in. So yeah, it's actually it seems to be like a conflicting experience.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for joining us in this journey to build a global Chinese diaspora community, one conversation at a time. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast, share it with your friends, and you can also follow us on Instagram at CulturedGen. That's where we post daily Chinese artistic and cultural content to inspire our modern living. We'll see you in the next episode. Take care.